What's going on, boys and girls? So it's been a while since I've done a reaction video. I've been doing a lot of opinion pieces because, opinions don't make substance, apparently. With that being said, I wanted to give a different video. So I checked Xiomaro and how his adventure in Linux has been going. I reacted to his last video about the update of him gaming on Linux and it's how it is. This one is entitled Getting into the Linux Mindset. As a reactor, that kind of title catches my interest. So I'm hoping this is as good as his last few videos. He's been very reasonable. His approach has been the right one. So I guess let's see what he's got to say, shall we?
Hello everyone, my name is Xiomaro and welcome back to the channel. So today I want to do a little primer on getting started with Linux as a desktop OS, so that I can later do a guide to getting started with gaming on Linux. Just a warning, this video won't really contain much to do with gaming, but after I began making a guide to getting started with gaming, I realized that there was a lot of non-gaming stuff that people might need to get their head around first. By making this guide first, I can keep the gaming guide mostly about gaming and refer people back to this for everything that isn't gaming related. So the first thing you're going to need to understand if you're trying out Linux for the first time is that some things work differently. Contrary to popular but outdated beliefs, Linux isn't really very complicated to install or use. But just like switching between Windows and Mac OS, there are some key differences in the way you use your machine. Using the Windows and Mac OS example, many Windows users, when they first use Mac OS, try to close their programs by clicking the red button at the top of their window bar. On Mac, that doesn't actually fully close the program. It just closes any active projects, documents, or whatever, depending on the program you're using. Of course, anybody who's used a Mac before knows you need to use Command Q to properly close something. Does that make Mac OS stupid or unintuitive? No, it just makes it different to what you might expect if you've only ever used Windows. A lot of the same stuff applies when switching to Linux. One advantage with Linux is that it can behave more or less like Windows or Mac OS depending on the distro and desktop environment you choose. Some distros, such as Elementary OS, will feel quite familiar to a Mac user, while something like Linux Mint might feel a little more familiar to a Windows user. Personally, I don't think you should choose a distro based on what is most familiar, because honestly, there are still going to be some differences, so it almost lulls you into a false sense of security. Linux Mint and Elementary are both excellent distros, but I wouldn't choose either of them just because they look familiar. GNOME has become the default desktop environment in many of the most popular distros. It doesn't feel much like Windows or Mac, but don't let that put you off. At least in my opinion, I think it's very intuitive and user-friendly. It just takes
Okay, I was trying to wait until he got to his next point before I commented because, I like creators to have their point before I say something unless they're an idiot. As far as it's not complicated if you choose the right distro. The problem is with that particular line of logic, we have a lot of people yelling install Arch. By the way, I run Arch. Not the best recommendations for a new user. And before any Arch fanboys yell and scream and say, oh, it's because you don't know how to install Arch. I installed Arch on a Sony Vaio Duo with 11, which is a slider PC. Fuck off. Really, though, at the end of the day, I agree. As far as familiarity, that's a tough one because that depends on the user. If you make them understand the caveats that while this looks familiar, this is not going to be the same. It's kind of like going into a kitchen and saying, here's the stove and the oven. Not every stove and oven are the same. Kind of the same way. They all have knobs and dials and, number pads and all the other jazz that come with them now. And the function's the same. As far as its core function, how you go about operating it is going to be different. So while some buttons might be in the same place, the way to get to there is going to be a little bit different. Just probably a bad analogy, but that's the best one I got off the top of my head. Um, as far as other stuff, I really don't have anything to yell and scream about. He's being, as far as GNOME, that's a matter of preference. Just leave it at that.
A little bit of getting used to. But there are more differences than just the desktop environment. For example, the package manager. This is something that is quite different from how the average Windows or Mac user will obtain software. In my opinion, the way most Linux distros handle downloading, installing, and uninstalling software is far superior to the alternatives. But it might feel a little bit jarring to someone who is new to the OS. On Windows and Mac, yes, they do have a built-in store, so you might get some software from there. But for quite a lot of things, you'll need to open your browser, go to the website of the software you're looking for, download a binary or whatever, and install it. On Linux, your package manager handles all of that, including software updates. So if you need Firefox, you just download it through the package manager. If you need something more obscure, you might need to enable additional repositories. But then after you've done that, it will just work like anything else. That adding repositories part might feel a bit clunky, hacky, or unintuitive to a Windows user, but in reality, it's no more hacky or clunky than having to go to a website to download something. It's just that you're used to doing that. And the way most distros handle it is actually quite a lot more secure than trusting a third-party website as well. The bottom line is, most things you can do on Windows or Mac can be done on Linux.
The only... most things, you are correct. There's still the hacky way of doing things sometimes. That downloading said program, that still happens on Linux, especially if you're running like an Ubuntu or a Debian base. Download a .deb. Yeah. Now, my understanding is that that regular .deb is not going to be updated via your package manager, because it's installed from outside the repositories. I could be wrong, which more than likely am. I do not really care about all the intricacies of what make up the different packages. I just care if it installs my shit. But you would have to use a tool generically if for some reason the stores don't work. Something like GDebi or yada yada yada. Linux still has things, but the repository stuff, yeah, it's, to me, that's no different than having to actually go and download the exe or the DMG from a third-party site, and I really don't care. The thing is, a lot of it to the end user is how you sell it to them. So if you sell, at the end of the day, they're not, if you don't have to mention repositories and all the other crap to them. To me, the best results I've had when switching people to Linux is give them the equivalent of what's the equivalent to a DMG? What's the equivalent to the App Store? Windows or Mac or iOS or Android or whatever. You tell them what they are, and that's what they'll be comfortable in. And just leave it at that. Now, you can run into issues with people downloading dumb shit, but that's just people. Again, problem will always be between keyboard, chair, or screen, keyboard, and chair, or screen and whatever is inputting. The user's going to always be the problem. So, let's keep going.
There might be a different way to go about it, and that actually brings me nicely to my next point. Be a problem solver. Honestly, I think this is something you need to learn to do regardless of which operating system you're using, but particularly for a less mainstream desktop OS like Linux, being able to Google your problems to find solutions is really important. As I mentioned before, some things might not seem intuitive at first, so if you get stuck, being able to search for answers is really useful. But the thing is, whatever OS you've come from, there will be quirks from that operating system that you instinctively just know through years of use. For example,
oh my god, somebody else actually said it. Did hell just freeze over? That has been my biggest complaint. That has been my biggest complaint with people who try making the switch. It doesn't work like Windows. It doesn't work like Mac OS. Linux sucks because it has this, and this problem. It's not a problem when those exact same problems pop up on Windows or Mac OS. You just learn to accept them. Because the thing that I always hate with the people who are like that, they're always looking at an excuse to go back to where they came from. And that's fine. Go back where it works best for you. I'm not going to force you into a sell of goods that isn't for you. Whatever. But on the same note, it might not work for you, but doesn't make it bad. You've just learned to navigate a platform, its problems, its pros and cons. That is the difference. And what you're talking about is pros and cons. Weigh them. Experience teaches you how to deal with certain problems. A Windows power user is no different than a Linux power user. Their knowledge, what I'm saying, the OSs are completely different. They know the ins and outs and the intricacies and the things you have to change to get stuff to work if there is a problem encountered. Linux has a lot more of the power end of that. You can, everything's a config file. You can change everything if you want. Windows, go hack the registry to fix things, or you learn the intricacies. Mac OS, pretty much what you see what you get there. But yeah, no, I agree. Like experience will dictate what you're willing to put up with. So you have to go into it with an open mind of, this is going to be different. This is not going to interact the same way. This is going to be a new set of problems and a new learning experience. And that is the mind frame that I love about you and that you're taking, is that it's a learning experience. That it's going to be different from what I'm coming from or coming to. And that things will be different. I'm going to have to learn the intricacies and the nuances of stuff. And I got nothing but props for you on that one. Anyway, sorry.
For example, everyone knows Control-Alt-Delete on Windows. Is that intuitive? Honestly, I don't think so, but it's something that most people know how to do when a program hangs and needs to be forced to close. If a program hangs and needs to be forced to close on Linux, it depends on your distro, but Control-Alt-Delete might not be the answer. That's something you're going to need to search for the first time it happens, but once you know how to do it, you know how to do it, so if it ever comes up again, it's not going to be a problem. If you choose your distro carefully, the problems you run into will mostly be easy to solve with a quick search. So I'm not saying you're going to have to up your computer competence tenfold, just be prepared to search for answers from time to time. If you are coming from Windows, another thing you need to be prepared for is that not everything will work, at least not exactly as you expect. If what you do is browse the web, play CSGO, and use Google Docs, honestly, everything will work as expected. If, on the other hand, you want to use the Adobe suite and play, for example, Fortnite or Apex Legends, I'm afraid that's not going to work. Or, more accurately, getting it to work is going to be beyond many people. Technically, you can get any Windows software working through a virtual machine with nearly bare metal performance if you're using GPU pass-through. But not only does that require specific hardware, it's also going to require some technical knowledge. And at that point, the whole ease of use argument just goes out of the window. For most people, if you can't get your games working through Proton or Lutris, that just means you can't play them. The list of software that doesn't work on Linux is definitely shrinking, but there are still a number of things that are just not going to work on Linux. So if you need something for your work, or if you're the sort of person who needs to be able to play all the latest games, Linux might not be for you. However, I've kind of focused on the bad stuff first because I feel like.
And you are correct. If you have specific needs and as a specific tool, because at the end of the day, that's what these are. They're tools. They're meant to get shit done. If you have a specific part of the tool that you need that only works with that specific wrench, then use that specific wrench and that specific tool to do what you need. And if that has to keep you there, perfectly fine. Really, that's the biggest thing. Like, my biggest gripe, and this is more directed at Linux users actually, is that people try to sell them a bag of goods that sometimes it's just not for the people that they're trying to sell. If people are looking for alternatives, if people are exploring the OS and they're like, hey, what's something similar to name application? And I would say Lightroom. Hey, there's this paid application from Corel called Aftershock Pro. There's Raw Therapy and Darktable on the other end. You give them recommendations. You don't force feed this stuff down their throat. And, you know, sometimes we have to accept as Linux users that not everyone and not every application or use case can be covered in Linux. And that's okay. But on the same note, if we have a potential solution or a potential alternative, as most people like to point out, then that's okay too, to make the suggestion. If they're perfectly content in Windows or Mac OS or whatever, and you know you don't need to force feed them Linux if their current choice is what they need or works or whatever reason. So I'm definitely in the camp of the pragmatists that fit what works for you and what you need.
Like it's important to be prepared. So let's move on to the positives. And here's one some people might not expect. Linux is actually easy to install. Honestly, the most complicated part of getting Linux set up is creating a bootable USB stick. But most distros have excellent guides on how to create a bootable USB. So while it's an extra step compared to having a pre-installed Windows system, it's something that most people should be capable of doing. Once you create a USB stick and boot into the Linux installer, it's actually very easy to install. Distros like Manjaro, Pop! OS, and others have very easy to understand installers, and most of them will even help you set up dual booting if you already have Windows installed. On top of that, a lot of your hardware will just work straight out of the box. And if it doesn't, many distros, such as Manjaro and Pop! OS again, make installing your graphics drivers and stuff like that super easy. I'm not going to...
Now, I can't speak for Pop! OS. I know I can't speak for Manjaro as far as short version is, I know a lot of Ubuntu and its various flavors now are rolling the most current NVIDIA drivers in with the ISO. So the open source Nuevo drivers, or however the hell you pronounce it, isn't really... Yeah. It's a thing, and that's okay. So they made installing it even more simple. And props. Manjaro, it's always been easy. Just, you know, graphics. Woo, it's not hard. You know, you're anyway. Yeah, I definitely agree. The thing is, it's like, as far as creating a bootable USB, that's actually not going to be the hardest part. The hardest part is having people trying to figure out how they're going to get that bootable USB to boot. That's the hardest part. Because download a program like Etcher. Yes, I still use Etcher. It's dead simple. It's 3 steps. Find an ISO. Find the USB. Click burn. And it does it for you. Bootable USB. This is no different than the Windows 10 tool where it downloads the ISO for you and creates a bootable USB. It's the same deal. It just does it with Linux distros, and you have to download the ISO or provide the ISO. That's it. So, yeah. And then once you get past the BIOS or UEFI stuff, it's dead. All the installers are dead simple. Probably, actually, the easiest one is actually, I would probably say the one from Blank on Linux. That one or the Deep in Linux one. All right, probably the 2 dead simplest installers. Like, you cannot fuck them up. They might fuck up, but as far as like on the user end, that's very hard to do. So yeah, installation is very easy.
sit here and tell you that this will be the case for everyone, but for me, getting my fresh Linux install ready to use is a lot quicker and easier than if I have to reinstall Windows. Of course, I do have some experience with Linux, so I know where to go for the more obscure drivers, such as for my mouse, but hey, if you'd never used Windows before, you'd have to search around a bit to figure that out too. And actually,
Here's the irony of that part that you just mentioned. I had a 2007 Mac Pro for a long time, for a while, about a year. And I was using it as a Windows machine because Mac OS isn't supported on it anymore because of 32-bit EFI on a 64-bit system. Lauded for design. Way to go, Apple. Idiots. And the funny thing is, I still had to use Driver Booster. Even with Windows and its great like hardware detection, I still had to use Driver Booster. I still feel like we're in Windows XP. And yeah, and you're right. A lot of stuff with Linux does just work sometimes out of the box. Not all the time, but that's been my general experience. So finding obscure drivers is no different to me than having to use a third-party tool like Driver Booster on Windows to find those drivers, because you're still going to have to go find the obscure driver. So it's kind of a moot point, but I get what you're saying.
Be covering stuff like getting your mouse driver set up when I do my more specific guide to gaming on Linux. It's not hard, so don't worry. Another benefit to Linux is flexibility and choice. I've mentioned all the different desktop environments and distros already. While there are only a handful that I would definitely recommend to new users, you do have a vast amount of choice. These choices mean you can have a setup that works best for you. With Windows, if you don't like the way something works, you're usually kind of stumped. And the same thing goes for Mac OS. There are some things you can change with Windows and Mac, but you're very limited compared to Linux. As I mentioned earlier, if you
depends on the desktop, depends on the OS. That's all I can really say. As far as Mac, I can move the dock and enable a dark mode and change a wallpaper. That's pretty much most of your settings right there. As far as your like UI, what you see is what you get with a Mac. Windows, you can move like the taskbar around, you can unpin stuff and that kind of stuff. Change the wallpapers, kind of get like different effect. There's ways to make Windows like a lot more customizable. Linux, again, this depends on the desktop environment that you're using. Something like Pantheon from is very limited in its customization. Then you get something like Budgie, this kind of an in-between of like Plasma and Pantheon. It all really depends on what you're looking for. I mean, if you want like oddball customization, you can go with like Enlightenment or a full Plasma install. If you want to just like customize to the hilt, it really depends on what you're looking for.
If you want a more Mac OS feel, you can go for something like Elementary OS. If you want bleeding edge software, you can go with a rolling release like Arch. And hell, if you want to install multiple desktop environments, you could do that. Why? Well, maybe you're just curious, maybe you prefer different workflows for different tasks, or need different features depending on what you're doing. And that brings me to my final point, speed and efficiency. Something you'll find with Linux is how fast and efficient it can be. It varies from distro to distro, but honestly, most distros are more lightweight than Windows. And because most distros are aimed at certain types of users, they'll usually only come with the stuff that you need. Or if they're more general purpose, they'll usually come with the basics, and you just install the extra stuff you need with the package manager. Windows, by comparison, gives you the kitchen sink. Not everyone wants or needs Cortana, gaming mode, automatic updates, and all that kind of stuff. But Windows gives you all of it, whether you like it or not. Some of the stuff can obviously be disabled, but honestly that's a bit of a faff, and it's one of the many ways Linux is more efficient. Having to make necessary changes to your system.
Well, this kind of gets into the whole Manjaro thing, pre-installed stuff. I don't mind pre-installed stuff. What I do mind is the fact that, like you mentioned in Windows, that shit's just kind of there. I can't make Cortana go the fuck away. I can't make X, Y, or Z go away. If I don't like the Office suite, a distribution is selected, I can uninstall it. I can download, WPS Office instead of SoftMaker, which might be default. Or I can, change out the player and make the other one go the fuck away. Whereas like other OSs make them a part of the core components of the operating system. And annoyingly so. So yeah, definitely. Totally get where you come from with that.
Just to get it running as fast as possible is very inefficient. Most Linux distros take a much more focused approach, and for that reason you'll probably notice that things like boot and shutdown times are way faster on Linux, and you don't need to go into all your installed programs and remove bloatware. Another thing is, obviously it depends on the software and your needs, but something will actually run faster. As a personal example, I record my videos as MKVs and then remux them to MP4 for editing. OBS does that a hell of a lot faster on Linux. I have no idea why, but the difference is pretty substantial. As I mentioned earlier, not everything is going to be like this. Some things might be slower, but in the defense of Linux, a lot of that is down to software support. I guess to the end user, it doesn't matter why something works more slowly, but still. And of course, the customizability of your desktop means you can have the workflow you want. For example, a software engineer might find that a tiling window manager is more efficient for their workflow. Others might find KDE or XFCE works better for them. The point is, the choice is there, and that added efficiency is available to you. All in all, switching to Linux definitely comes with some fundamental changes to the way you use your computer, but there are some serious benefits to making the switch. Stay tuned for my Gaming on Linux guide that will be coming later this week. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please feel free to subscribe for more gaming guides, news, and discussion. And don't forget to check out the links below to Patreon, Discord, and Twitch. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Can be. It varies from...
Alright, so that is the new video from Xiomaro. Part of the course, I really have nothing to yell and scream about. So this video is actually going to be quite disappointing for a lot of people. But really, he brings up the right mindset. He brings up pretty much every point that's needed. You have to be, at the end of the day, you have to be willing and open. And that's really the mindset that he's talking about. That it's not about... And when I say willing and open, you have to be open to understanding that this is different. iOS is different from Android. Android is different from iOS. It's the same thing. It's the same thing when I switch back to a BlackBerry 10 device and I go to Android. You know how much it takes my brain to readjust? Because it's a different paradigm. It's the same way with like these kind of systems. So he makes every single point that needs to be made. It really is. It's about being open-minded and understanding. So, really at the end of the day, that's all I have to say. Xiomaro, keep up the good work. Can't wait for more Linux content from you, brother. You guys know what to do. All the Patreon and Indiegogo affiliate link stuff is down below. Peace.